Welcome back. This is Lab 6, Scale and Load Balance Your Architecture. I'm Richard Golson, and I'm going to take you through Task 5, which is testing auto-scaling. So we created that auto-scale group with a minimum of 2 instances, and we can see that right here. Here's our auto-scale group. We have the 2 instances. We set the desired capacity at 2, and we set a minimum of 2. We also capped it at 6 instances. So currently 2 instances are running because that minimum size is 2. The group is currently not under any real load. So we're now going to increase the load to cause auto scaling to add additional instances. So what we're going to do in this management console is go to the CloudWatch service. So let's click on that now. In CloudWatch, which is what is monitoring the resource usage. So CloudWatch is being used to monitor the resource usage and then can trigger auto scaling. Right. So we have 2 alarms. So one alarm is alarm high, target tracking, lab auto scaling group, alarm high. The other one is target tracking, lab auto scaling, alarm group low. And so you can see what it's measuring for: CPU utilization greater than 60 for 3 data points within 3 minutes. If it exceeds that, then we're going to get a scaling event. So let's take a look at just right now, just the one that's indicating that it's okay. All right. So what I'm going to do here, and I want to point out that if you don't see this, make sure you give it enough time. I've allowed 5-10 minutes to go by, enough time that it actually reflects this. But you can go back to auto scaling and modify the auto scaling group, the auto scaling policy right here. And so I could go in here and edit that auto scaling policy and actually set the target value lower. By setting it to a lower target value, we're saying, hey, you know what? We want to keep average CPU utilization, say, at 50%. That's something we could set. And that would then trigger auto scaling, perhaps would then trigger the auto scaling at the current status of things. So we don't need to change that. That is just in case your alarm doesn't get triggered. So we're going to cancel this. I'm not making any changes to it. So just keep in mind, that's what they're talking about here, is actually modifying it to 50. So then let's scroll down. Okay. And we're going to look at that OK alarm, the one that's set to OK. And if we take a look at the details here, again, this is the one that is the alarm high. It's in OK state. And you can see that we had an initial burst, average CPU actually came close to 30%. I think it looks like it topped out at 20. You can imagine this is when the EC2 instances were deployed. When they deploy or start up, they're going to use more CPU. There's going to be more processes running, so it's going to consume more CPU. Notice that it never reached 60%. So it stayed well below that, and we're in the green. So status changed to green. We're in good shape. So we had no status, then we're getting status information here, and it's staying in there. And you can do the refresh and do the update, and you can see we're a little bit further along. We had a little bump here, probably when I was making additional requests that barely moved the needle on that, right? All right, so we're good to go on there. Let's go to the browser tab here. And let's actually add some load. Before I do that, in fact, let's take a look at the target group and let's refresh this to see where we were at. So you can see that I had added additional requests, and then I just loaded that page again. It looks like it may have bumped it up. But in any case, this is our request count. This isn't actually monitoring how many targets that we have, right? So that hasn't changed. We're still sitting at 2, right? So let's go here. And what we're going to use is this button. This is the load test button. So I've mentioned before, stay away from the load test button because what it does is it actually runs processes that are going to tax the CPU. This is going to put a load on our CPU so we can see auto scaling occur. So we'll click on that load test button here. And we can see that it's showing that it's going to be set to 100%. We might not hit 100% right away, but it's going to hit it. This will auto refresh every 5 seconds, so it'll actually pull the value. Let's go over to our target groups and do a refresh here and see if anything's happening on this end. So we're still sitting at a target count of about 2. If I go back over to CloudWatch and take a look here. Let's refresh this. And we can see that our CPU utilization is bumped up. And CloudWatch is gathering data points. So it's really historical. It's not live data. And so we're not necessarily going to see the current state, meaning that is it truly at 100% CPU, average CPU load? It may or may not be. CloudWatch really can't give us that information. But if we go to our instances, we'll go ahead and refresh that. And I can select any one of the instances and take a look at the monitoring. Let's see if it'll display anything on that. And so you can see our CPU utilization is going up. So it's slowly increasing. It may take a little bit of time to get there. And we could just refresh that. So again, you need to give it a little bit of time. Eventually, when CPU utilization exceeds the 60% line for more than 3 minutes, it will trigger auto scaling. So if we go back over to here, and what we're looking for is to see that alarm high goes into an alarm state. So if I refresh that, you can see that both are okay. And if I come back over here and refresh this, see, we've now shot well over 60% average CPU utilization. So we've hit it. So it just took a little bit of time for that to be reflected. In about 3 minutes of it crossing this threshold here, so we're probably a minute into this, we're going to start seeing some new EC2 instances getting deployed. And if I do a refresh here, we may see our instance count increase. We look at our target groups and take a look at our targets and see if we have any new targets. Not yet. Eventually that will happen. And then if we go back to our auto scaling and take a look at our activity here, you can see that no new activity has occurred. So no need to launch it yet because it's still taking some time. This is when you might say, okay, we're really tapping out here. We're maxing out CPU load, and we may find a sluggish response to requests to our site. And that being the case, that's when you go in and start taking a look. Is auto scaling, is it scaling soon enough? Do we need to set the value lower so it scales quicker? There's things that we can make adjustments to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and when we'll come back, we'll take a look and see whether we've hit, the results of that additional load on there. So I'll go ahead and do a pause here. Okay, welcome back. We can see that auto scaling has actually deployed 2 additional instances here. So they're in warm-up stage. And if we take a look at CloudWatch alarms, we can see from the graph, it's been an alarm for a significant period of time until those instances come online and can start receiving traffic from our load balancer. We'll continue to see a high CPU usage like this. Ultimately, what you'd like to see is the CPU usage to start coming down. It might not, because of the way that this application is running the load test. That might continue to increase load even as we're adding additional instances. If they're still topping out at 100%, then that means that, we aren't necessarily going to see the instance count drop. And that's again something you'd have to account for in terms of, would it make more sense to go back and modify the the application, the way it handles requests, and then create a new custom AMI? Or do we go back and modify the lab template, the launch template, identifying a more robust instance type with more CPU capacity and that would increase our CPU per instance. So we could do things like that. Auto scaling in terms of providing scaling out and scaling in. This is scaling out where we're adding additional instances, and scaling in would be removing them. That's horizontal. We know that we can still do vertical scaling. We just can't use auto scaling for that. We'd have to modify the launch template and change the instance type that's indicated in the launch template. And then we would redeploy the auto scale group with the new launch template. Okay, let's take a look here and see if these have updated and gone into, no, not there yet. Oh, yes, they are. So we've increased the capacity. We have 4 that are actually online and 2 more have been added. And if I go to my target groups, you see these are all showing as healthy. So they should be receiving traffic. And now we're showing 6 healthy instances. So if I go back over here, and go to this, excuse me, go back here. I got to hit the right button. That's the one we want right there. Let's take a look and see what we get for the values here. So this is 280. If I refresh it, I'm seeing 38 F5. And now I'm seeing a 3rd instance. And so you can see it's rotating through the different instances, but not necessarily bouncing across to US East 1A and US East 1B. There we go. So you can see it's actually using all those EC2 instances, and it's still running the load test here. Keep hitting that, but it's really this. And if we take a look here in CloudWatch and do a refresh here, you'll see that, yes, it's finally driven it down to below 60%. And if it keeps decreasing, that will, in fact, we will start seeing the termination of those instances from the target group. And that we would typically see that in the auto scaling. Let's refresh this. Go back to our activity, excuse me. And I meant to refresh down here. So this hasn't updated yet, but we do know that those are actually ready. And I believe they are receiving traffic. So the other thing I want to note is that initially we set a static value of 2 for desired capacity. Note that desired capacity is now at 6 because that matches the number of instances that are desired to achieve 60% average CPU usage. So we set an initial value, and then this reflects the value needed to achieve our policy of 60% average CPU utilization. And then finally, if we take a look over here at our target groups and refresh that, that all looks good too. So we're good to go there. And you can go and check out the monitoring and other values as well. You can see how the healthy host values have increased over time. We don't have any unhealthy hosts. And then you can see how a target response time dropped dramatically, meaning that the amount of time it took for the target to respond decreased dramatically, actually dropped below what we were seeing initially, or we were seeing here as things spiked. And it started rising again. So these are all things you can monitor from these panels here to determine if you've configured things the way you'd like and if it's as responsive as it should be. We can use actual metrics rather than does it feel responsive? We can actually look at that. And then finally, under load balancers, there are additional monitoring panels that we can use here to take a look at things like target response time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So all kinds of really nice things to monitor the usage. So that's it for this part of the lab. When we come back, we'll take a look at our final task, which is a little bit of cleanup of the web server one we use to create our custom AMI. So I'll see you then.